On this episode of Urban U, we honor Pride Month with the powerful story of CUNY Prof Glenn Magpantay, recently named to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Our CUNY Authors series presents a bestseller that revives the legacy of an Indian icon, the first woman cabinet minister in the British Empire, and first female president of the UN General Assembly, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. That and more, including a cooperative game about the future of New York City. Welcome to Urban U.
There was a time in which we said the people who are in CUNY right now, women, people of color, foreign-born Americans, could not be educated in America. That is not true today anymore. And that is one of the struggles and the successes of the civil rights movement. Now, that's not to say that we have achieved racial equality or gender equality in America. We still have a long way to go.
Hunter College professor Glenn Magpantay has been helping to right those wrongs through the years, and now he has taken on a new role in the fight.
I know the great Glenn Magpantay is here, who I recently named to serve on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights.
And the changes that we've seen and the successes of the civil rights movement, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, has made a tremendous impact. As a commission, we will explore the federal policies and practices that manifest racial, gender, faith-based discrimination, and we will make recommendations. Once we make our recommendations, they go to the United States Congress and the President. And then, sometimes they just sit there, but we try to work very hard to make sure that those recommendations are fully implemented. This year, the Commission released a report, an investigation on the federal response to anti-Asian violence in America. We saw the discrimination that Asian Americans have faced during COVID-19. Since COVID-19 was dubbed the China virus, inflicting people with the Kung flu. Words matter. And those words that were uttered resulted in people being spit at, beaten up, killed in some instances. This issue is very personal to me. I'm the survivor of a hate crime from being gay from 25 years ago. I'm the victim of a hate crime from being Asian from 25 months ago. My parents came to the United States right after the immigration restrictions were lifted that prevented Asians from emigrating. They came from the Philippines. I grew up in the 1970s in Queens. I was one of the first wave of immigrants, of Asians, to come to America. I was the only Asian in my block. I came out as gay in the 1980s, and that was at the height of the AIDS crisis. I was convinced I was going to catch AIDS and die. I didn't get good grades. I hated piano lessons. I was completely alone. I was one of those gay kids, one of those Asian kids that said, maybe I should just commit suicide.
How did you turn things around from the gay Asian kid who was thinking of committing suicide to where you are now?
Black woman, a Black Panther from the 1950s, who saw me struggling as a young man and just saw someone who needed help. I was not out to my parents. I was not out to myself. I was completely alone. Remember, there were no Asians in the 1970s, or very few. No one looked like me. Being gay was, God's punishment. But you saw a talent in me, an ability in me, and took me under her wing. That's why I learned about the civil rights movement. That's why I learned about racial justice. That's how I survived. I am a longtime civil rights attorney. I've done LGBT rights work. I'll tell you, I've been talking about this stuff for 20 years. And sometimes I felt no one listens to me. I had to file lawsuits, and I didn't always win. But now that I got on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, I can ask these questions, and I have the power and the authority of federal statute and federal law to make sure that agencies fully respond to me. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do what I want them to do, but they have a statutory obligation to respond to my inquiries, and that's exciting.
Magpantay feels one of the main causes of prejudice is miscommunication.
We don't have conversations as much as we used to. We should be able to have a conversation and disagree, but still learn about each other. Still respect others' opinion. We need to find those areas that bring us together. We need to find that commonality and find areas where, when there is disagreement, when there is unfairness and injustice, to talk about that. That's one of the reasons why I like to teach at CUNY, is that in my classroom, we have those conversations. We can say provocative things, and I try to create a safe space where we can learn and disagree. You know, a lot of the learning actually comes up with conflict, right? Comes from mistakes. No shame in saying something wrong, taking responsibility, apologizing, and learning something different. The hate crimes and discrimination in our communities. And it's not just, you know, Asians and LGBT folk. It's the killing of transgender women of color today. The attacks that are happening against Muslims, South Asians, Sikhs, Jewish people here in America today is highly disturbing. The law is designed to protect communities and to find justice. And we need to find ways to make sure that the system of government, that the laws that are designed to protect our communities are fully enforced and are accessible to our communities. That is the work of the Commission. That is the work that I'm doing today.
I'm Scott Kirby for Urban U.
Here at Hunter when Professor Jonathan Rosenberg stopped in my office to share his newly published first book on America and world affairs. And he handed me a copy of the book. I was pleased, but I was curious about why I would be particularly interested in it. I'm not an Americanist, and he picked up on that cue and he said, well, Madam Pandit. It took me a bit to connect that Madam Pandit was Vijay Lakshmi Pandit Nehru's sister. So I started to explore, and what I found is she literally wasn't anywhere. So that led me on a quest that produced my last book called The Peacemakers, where she featured. But I told my partner, what I really want to do is I want to write a biography of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, and I would like to do it for Penguin. A few weeks later, Penguin wrote to me out of the blue and said, would you like to write a biography of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit for us? And I just took this as an incredible cosmic sign. There's a whole movement in India and in the field in general to explore biography. And so I'm happy to have been on the pioneering cusp of that. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, known as Madam Pandit, worked alongside Mahatma Gandhi on anti-colonial campaigns and went to prison for it several times. She was India's first woman cabinet minister, the first woman ambassador to the United States. She was India's first ambassador to the United Nations and the first woman president of the UN General Assembly. It's a set of titles, but that doesn't really tell us who she was or what she did. She's someone I like to think of as everywhere all at once. She is detained by the police for the attempted assassination of Mussolini. She works with the likes of Charles de Gaulle, Madame Chang. She tells Kennedy not to go to Dallas. Robert Oppenheimer turns to her to ask for her assistance to prevent nuclear annihilation. W.E.B. Du Bois said that she was someone who was responsible for the successful assault on the color line. So that's who she was, someone who championed race justice and gender equality and to set the precedent for human rights. I visited over 40 archives in 7 countries and used material in 5 languages, and this took 8 years. I also interviewed numerous people. So I had to sift through tens of thousands of documents. Every archive, no matter how complete it might be, is still, in a sense, missing pieces of the story. Some of this is intentional, They left it out because they don't want to tell the story, and some of it is unintentional. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit's story is not well known, not just because she's a woman, but because she winds up coming out of retirement to battle her own niece. Indira Gandhi declares a state of emergency in India in 1975. And when Indira Gandhi suspends democracy, Madam Pandit is under house arrest, and her daughter, Nayanthara Sehgal, one of India's most eminent writers, she releases a story here under a pseudonym, Azad, which means freedom. And she sort of lets the cat out of the bag. And it is the spark that Madam Pandit needs. She comes out of retirement swinging, and she goes hard at her niece. She leads the campaign against her, and Indira Gandhi is taken aback by the international criticism and ends up declaring new elections. She thinks she's going to win, and so her aunt and her compete. Her aunt is leading the opposition, and they win. But Indira Gandhi is reelected in 1980. When she comes back, she's very upset at her aunt and vindictively has her scrubbed from the public record. So that's part of the reason why people don't know about her. I think that there are some very careful choices that have to be made by the writer of a biography. Also made sure to try to take into account the views of friends and foes alike. What makes her impressive is the fact that she had struggles, and it is her humanity that makes her so inspiring and relatable. The book released just before Christmas in India. I did signings and did launch events, and one of my friends over there sent a clipping. The Asian Age has a prestigious bestseller list in nonfiction, and it hit number 3. And it stayed there for the first 2 months of its release. Right now, it's only a South Asia release. The internationalist ideals of the 30s, 40s, and 50s was a world where the infrastructure of human rights would protect people all over the world, whatever kind of state that they lived in. At our moment in history, those kinds of ideals might seem far, but only a few years ago, the word globalization was on everyone's lips. Certain complementing elements of globalization involving the economy, crises, and conflict have fed instability, and democracies have been very flat-footed in being able to respond, in part because the problems themselves are beyond any one state. We need more international structure to deal with the problem, but people's faith in democracy is eroding, and the impulse is to go towards more authoritarian figures who promise to act fast. But they can't because the problems are beyond any one state. So international cooperation is basically our only way forward. And Madam Pandit's vision and work over her career and those of her generation still hold true as pathways that we need.
I'm Hannah Kavanagh for Urban U.
The old formula goes, once you have a college degree, you can try to get hired, and maybe in between get an internship. But that equation is getting a rethink with skills-first hiring. Skills-first hiring rearranges the order of things so that you can get an internship or apprenticeship and maybe even a job before you get that degree.
I knew that I needed to gain experience to get a job in any type of industry, so I felt this was going to be the way to do that. But thankfully, not only did I gain experience, but I also gained a full-time position at the end of it all.
CUNY students Bryan, Cortes and Gerardo Molina are software engineers at Deloitte Consulting, one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. Last year, Cortes and Molina participated in CUNY's Applied Science College Apprenticeship Program.
I was originally at City Tech when I got an email from one of my professors to a program, so I applied there.
As soon as I saw that email, that gave me like a light at the end of the tunnel. And as soon as I saw it, I jumped at the opportunity.
In 2020, CUNY worked with a nonprofit called the New York Jobs CEO Council to create 5 apprenticeship programs across 10 colleges. Indeed.com defines an apprenticeship as a long-term training program in which you learn the skills of a trade while receiving compensation. It's considered more substantial than an internship. In the CUNY program, students get class credit for going to work.
Those credits still made me a full-time student at City Tech. It was a great opportunity since it allowed me to work, focus completely on the 12 weeks.
It was all very hard at first because there was a lot of meetings that we had to attend to during the day, and then we had to somehow magically fit our schoolwork. But it all worked out fine. I feel like once you go through that 12-week program, it does make you a better person in many ways. Like, you grow in many, many ways.
It's very surreal. I didn't know how to expect a corporate job or an office, so it was all new to me.
Deloitte told us the state program coincides with their own mission to narrow the opportunity gap with skills-first hiring. A 2021 report said 87% of companies were seeing a shortage in skilled employees. A jobs placement CEO argued that degree-based hiring is outdated and can overlook Black and Hispanic potential recruits.
So I feel like as a person of color from the Bronx, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions of how we behave or how we act or how we are. And I feel like with this campaign that we're currently doing, it breaks those barriers. Not only that, it also motivates CUNY students to push for the opportunities that are there, as long as they have the motivation and the drive to do so.
I will say, obviously, experience is very important. You can always, shoot your shot. Always look out for internships and other opportunities just to grow your network, even if just that.
This apprenticeship program allowed me to achieve my goal a lot sooner. I would say 3 years sooner than what I expected. My end goal, my career goal, was to become a junior software engineer, and I was able to achieve that before my bachelor's. So I would say that always push for your dreams, always take chances, because at the end of the day, you will never know what will happen unless you do.
The state announced this year a $2 million investment for a major expansion, meaning more apprenticeship opportunities for CUNY students. For Urban U, this is Shannon Ayala.
Still up on Urban U, the Institute for Sustainable Cities at Hunter College introduces you to a board game that tackles the changing energy needs of the future of New York City. Stay tuned.
Climate change, natural disasters, pandemics, these kinds of things affect our food system. They affect the food chain. Even recently, I've noticed over the past couple of weeks in New York City, we've had some pretty crazy weather, and that led to less food in the supermarkets. And I think that if we don't have a strong local food system, it's going to be difficult to access the food when there are these major emergencies that are happening. My name is Dr. Shannon Caravello. I'm an assistant professor in the Health and Phys Ed Department in Health Sciences, and I'm also the Community Farm and Garden Administrator here at the KCC Community Farm and Garden. I started at the farm well over a decade ago. I was an adjunct professor at the time, and I came here specifically because of food insecurity. I was a mother on SNAP benefits, and I needed to support my 2 kids, and I thought that this would be a good way to help supplement my income in terms of bringing in healthy food, because with the SNAP benefits it wasn't very much, and I thought this might be a good way to put a little bit of sweat equity in, have some skill acquisition to be able to grow my own. And since I had that here, I said, let me go ahead and take a shot, and turns out it set me on a whole career path, which I'm really excited about. So with the farm, there's lots of things that happen depending on the different seasons. Currently, we're in full propagation mode. So essentially what happens is every day we will come in and start off by planting seeds in a propagation chamber in our farm shed, and we will bring those seeds out in the trays here. We'll plant them, we'll get them set up, and then every night, because the weather is too cold, we'll bring them back into a warmer environment, and then we'll bring them out. It's called hardening off, and it just stabilizes them to be planted out. Everything we grow here is distributed to our students. So mid-April till about mid-November, we will distribute all the produce on a weekly basis. And we can grow anywhere from 2,500 to 4,000 pounds of produce for a growing season. We have a very large population of food insecure students at Kingsborough specifically and at CUNY across the campuses. So we are already meeting the community needs. And we want to support that because healthy eating leads to better educational outcomes. I've watched students just blossom and bloom, total pun intended, where they'll come in and not know anything, and the next thing you know, they're out there advocating for this food system, and it puts them more in connection with the food system because so many of us are so disconnected, especially those of us who were born and raised in New York City. A lot of students will talk about the conversation when it comes to pesticides about, is this strawberry healthy for me or not healthy for me because it has pesticides? And I say to them, okay, it's nice that you want that strawberry to be healthy for you, but what about the health of the other people that are growing that strawberry? What about the pesticides that are being put somewhere else in the environment where this strawberry is growing, and the environmental impact of the metric tons of pesticides that are being put into living environments that people are working in and living in? They're accumulating these pesticides on their body, bringing it home to their families, and it's spreading outwards. So I want them to not just think about the environmental degradation on a small scale, but on a bigger scale. What's the impact of the food choices that I'm making? Just letting students know that there are different types of agriculture out there and how that agriculture is important, because if you're doing a good organic system, you're looking at a biodiverse farm, they're feeding the soil, versus monoculture in conventional growing where they're not feeding the soil. So having that conversation about how soil health matters is super important. At the end of the day, the key is to get seeds and plants into the ground so we can produce food. I come at it from an emergency situation. If we can't have access to this food because there's disruption in transportation, having some emergency backup, growing in our community gardens, growing in our local parks even, it's not going to save everything, but it will certainly help supplement. And when we bring in the conversation with students about how to grow things and the weather, we talk about how things are difficult for us right now as a farm. We don't know what's going to happen from day to day because a couple of weeks ago we had snow. Today it's 65 degrees. And so that puts a lot of stress on the plants, and it causes us to have to renegotiate our crop plan and to figure out what are we going to grow. And that's part of the conversation when we bring people into the space that we say climate change is disrupting us. We really take it day by day, and we are critical thinkers, and we have to work fast on our feet to say, okay, this is happening, what are we going to do? So my attitude is, well, we're going to need to grow for whatever's going to happen. We want to be ready to continue to move forward. And as somebody in the Crohn's and colitis community, it's important to have these conversations about healthy eating because a lot of autoimmune diseases are becoming epidemic at this point, and a lot of that has to do with some of the food additives that are coming in and disrupting our gut microbiome. We have a lot of environmental bioaccumulation that's happening, environmental impact happening on us that we need to address, and we need to have those conversations so people can make better decisions and to support better agricultural systems that are going to help them. So now I'm learning about grant writing and bringing funding into the farm and how important that is. The administrative part of how much work goes into running a farm, making sure we order what we need, and working around obstacles, and knowing that with time, I'm going to get through. With time, we're going to make a difference. And sharing that with other people. During the pandemic, we could have disappeared. We weren't going to let that happen. I didn't want that to happen. I mean, there were times I was here by myself, this lone faculty member saying, I'm going to plant and try to grow something and make things happen, just even to build the community. So maybe we didn't have as much production, but we built a nice, strong community. That alone, to me, at the end of the day, is the most important thing, that we're connecting on a human level and making people's lives better.
Imagine the board game Monopoly, but rather than building a real estate empire, you're building the clean energy infrastructure of the 21st century. A board game developed out of Hunter College does just that.
This game is based using New York City as kind of the template. Here's the map of New York. Here's the different geographic relations between where you can draw power from. Offshore wind and solar are the two biggest and most easily implemented sources of clean energy that you can play in the game. We've also talked about using nuclear power which is something that, it's a challenge to get people to really understand, how that fits into a clean energy system. But when it comes right down to it, we need every type of technology that we can harness in order to meet this challenge.
That challenge is climate change, and the board game is energetic. Players must build the carbon-neutral energy grid of the New York City of the future.
When I played it, it was like people wanted to work together and win together and like kind of figure things out because of the collaborative nature. It's not like a game where you can like hold the team back by not knowing what you're doing. Everyone's learning.
Players take on the role of activist, politician, entrepreneur, or engineer, and work with the team to develop a new power grid.
One of my friends invited me to play a board game. She says it's really exciting and it got me hooked. When I play the game, I usually go with politicians. I really like the politician's superpower, which is they can buy or sell public opinions. If you use that power in good places, it can actually helps you a lot in the long way. Or you want to build another water dam, and you're just a little bit short on the money, so you might want to sell out a few points. Definitely you want to talk with others and see if they are on board with it.
And that collaboration is at the heart of Energetic, the brainchild of Richard Reese of City Atlas and the Institute for Sustainable Cities.
What does it take for cities to be able to survive and thrive in a world that's changing? You have to have an understanding of the energy needs of the city and the functions that energy supports. You also have to have an understanding of the challenges that climate change will pose to the city in terms of specific impacts, flooding, heat, political instability that will come with, greater climate variability.
The game was created at City Atlas in brainstorming sessions with leaders, interns, and students.
We drew upon their skills, the engineering students, the graphic design students, architecture students.
I helped create the rules for the game. I was always kind of interested in sustainability and climate change and all of that. Like I said, I was at the Sustainability Club at Hunter. I kind of wanted to find a way to use that interest to actually help things. I hadn't always had a lot of success doing that, and sometimes it just feels really difficult to make any kind of change in an issue that's so big.
Attacking this huge challenge, laws in New York State passed by New York's Governor Kathy Hochul and in New York City aim to make the city carbon neutral by 2050, a goal that energetic teams strive to achieve by 2035.
You see some lucky groups manage to pull it off, and by 2035 they got everything decarbonized. Other times you can see the frustrations building up. They don't want to place carbon capture and sequestration. They don't want to play nuclear, but at a certain point you're constrained and you realize, no, you have to start playing some of these things that you may not necessarily like doing, but that are really necessary to keep this whole system functioning. It's also in use in 16 public high schools in New York City, which is the thing that's very, very important to us.
A simple game, we have limited amount of time. There are only really 4 metrics and then some other stuff that goes into it.
I learned the hard way that politics have a major part into whether or not sustainable energy and renewable energy is effective.
The hope is that the collaborative gameplay would spill over into the real world of policy and decision-making on this issue vital to a clean energy future.
If you have one group or one person working in isolation, you're not going to get anywhere. But once you start crossing those lines and you start getting politicians and activists working together and entrepreneurs and engineers, and so all the roles of the game, that's how you get somewhere. And it's a little bit of idealism in there, but the way you start is by showing people on this micro scale of a game, and they can see what could happen, and then gets them a little closer to thinking, maybe we can make something like this happen in the real world, because there is a path.
For Urban U, I'm Craig Thompson.
And that's a wrap. For more episode highlights and sneak peeks into our upcoming stories, meet us on our social media platforms. Thank you for watching these stories from the largest university in the nation, the City University of New York.